You're so welcome to week 2, where we've got some guest speakers. Thank you for popping along. We've got a focus then on service learning or community-based learning, and really then focusing in on, I suppose, sharing your understandings, and then we have some real practical hands-on continued activities from last week that you might like to do with your cohort. And yeah, so if we go straight into our outline where we are, Maria.
Yes, that's it. So we did the get started, which was great last week, and indeed the chat was on fire. So we can hopefully do the same again this week, keep it smoldering. And this week is about getting aware. So as Lorraine was saying, so we're going to really kind of focus in about the community-based learning and on service learning, but then kind of see how that branches out and how we can connect that to migrant communities. Go to the next. Yeah.
Great. Oh yes. So
yeah, that's your
funding. So anyone who has been inspired in this short course series and would like to continue or maybe start a new project with migrant communities, refuge communities, we have funding from this Erasmus Plus project. So if you'd like to introduce something into a module, either in semester 1 or semester 2, we'd love to hear from you. You're so welcome to get in touch. And that funding can be used to gift to community partners for their expertise, for their time. It can be used for the purchase of supplies, materials, printing materials, equipment, transport, anything that you need in relation to the student and staff connections with that community group. So that funding will come either from internal, the CKI fund within the University of Galway, or particularly from this Erasmus Plus project. So if that's of interest to people, go for it. Great. Money, it's great. Yeah. Now, we thought to really make this tangible, we just go straight into the doers. So, Anya, look at you, you're up first. You have no idea. There you go. You've been running a lovely service learning module. Would you like to share briefly how that experience has worked out for you, what your students have gotten from it, and maybe a little bit of a touch on some of the impact you think that you've had with the community? So over to Anne.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So just very briefly, I set up a service learning program in 2007. So I'm in the School of Languages, Literatures and Cultures in the discipline of Italian. And the idea was to get our students out into the community, sharing their language skills, their knowledge of intercultural communication. At the time, the government was dismantling foreign language instruction in schools. And so there was a huge gap in terms of need. Plus, there was also a huge change in student cohort, and multilingualism was coming into primary schools. And this was happening all around us. And it was also a great opportunity for our students to conduct a different type of learning and to put into practice some of the things they had learned over the previous 3 years. So it was targeted at our 4th year, our final year students who would have been just back from Italy usually. And so it took a lot of work, a lot of effort. It was refined every year from 2007 onwards. We learned a lot along the way in terms of structure, assessment, working with schools, working with groups, managing expectations, both in terms of the students and the community partners, and embedding a reflective process in it at all levels. That was really important. Managing also workload was another thing, that it didn't spiral to become, it's only a 5 ECTS course. So it did have the potential to become, all consuming because of the nature of it. I'll speak about just up until pre-COVID, because COVID impacted hugely on the course, and it hasn't actually run since then, but that's another matter. But up until then, we had about 20 University of Galway students, NUI Galway students, would go out into the community in 1s or 2s, teach a course, a language course in a school for 6 weeks. And then at the end of that, we would bring all the primary school children onto campus and have a little celebration day and a presentation of a certificate and some pizza, and just celebrate their language learning and their language journey. The key thing, in 6 weeks, you're not going to learn a language. Our main aim was that they would have an enjoyable experience of language learning, that language diversity in the classroom would be valued, and our students also that they would become ambassadors as language learners within the schools. So that was the aim of it. I mean, we had, I think, 300 on average primary school children each year who did it across working with 8 different primary schools, up to 10 some years, depending on how many students we had doing it. So it was quite large and very successful. It created a wonderful community, and the final day on campus was a wonderful event to celebrate both our own student success and the primary school students as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
There's a 4-week course that they're doing something on this university of Sanctuary.
Sorry, I'll just be there. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Jan.
yeah, so it was very beneficial to our own university students. I had to do a little bit of, they did a semester of preparation before going out in the language teaching. So they learned pedagogy, language pedagogy, but also how to reflective learning, how to work with a partner, what to learn from mistakes, learning from things that went wrong. A lot of them saw themselves as, I used to call them the crusading angels, aren't I wonderful coming in here to the school with all my knowledge? And I said, no, you're as much learners as you are teachers. And so, their journey and their ability to learn as the course went on was always wonderful. Their final reflections that they had to write as part of their teaching, their portfolio that they developed, were always just wonderful to see how they themselves realized how much they had progressed as part of this learning experience and how much they got out of it, and in sort of personal statements and then letters of references that I'd be writing for them later on. It really had a huge impact on them. Now it's harder to assess the impact on the primary school children, but generally it seemed from the teachers and from the schools involved, they were always very happy to be involved. So I think I'll leave it at that. That's probably long enough.
They might all come on and study Italian now as an undergrad.
Yeah, we've had, some of them follow through, but I said that wasn't the main focus of it. The focus is promoting linguistic diversity, language learning, in a cohort in our schools, which often don't get that opportunity. So
thanks, Anne. I think what you've touched on there is that sometimes a service learning module might need a pre-module where you maybe key up some of that content, right? That, as you were saying, some of the material that they needed in order to succeed with the community partner. That might be something that people consider. And then I think you've also mentioned that one of the assessments can be their reflection papers. So I think what we'll provide next week actually are samples of how you can do reflection with your cohorts in order to, essentially have that as a key aspect of your assessment if you need that in your cohort. Thank you so much. And if there's questions, people can pop them in the chat and we can maybe also refer to them at the end. And thank you so much.
Well,
and over to Lindsay now. Lindsay, you have a great experience as well of working with a particular cohort, a community group with a student. Do you want to?
Yeah, well, I suppose my experience is a little bit different from Anne's in that I didn't set about to plan a community-based learning module. But what I did was I drew, I suppose, on my own expertise in terms of teaching children's literature. I'm based in Italian and children's studies, just to clarify that. So I teach a course on picture books. And as part of the module, they reflect on their own experience as reading picture books as children. And then they can opt either to write an essay or to make a picture book as their final assignment. So it's really creative and that's good fun to teach. But while I started teaching this module, I also came across a student who was actually doing Italian, who wasn't doing children's studies at all, but who had made some picture books and had made one during her TY experience. And it was called I Want to Speak French. So, of course, I'm interested in the connection between languages and children's literature and schools and education. So immediately I thought, wouldn't that be interesting to work with her? And we had this crisis in Ireland developing at the time, which was obviously the arrival of so many, Ukrainian people fleeing the war and coming to Ireland. And we knew that they were going to be coming into Irish primary schools. And I don't know, we just kind of had this idea together that wouldn't it be great to do I Want to Speak Ukrainian? And to kind of work with the community. I've already had a bit of experience working with the undergraduate students. and some work as well with school children. So I thought we'll combine the 4 things and we'll make a book which we could then make available to the national schools in Galway, even though now it's actually gone nationwide, which is great. And we wanted to do something to respond very quickly to this need. So we thought self-publishing would be the way to go, because it takes forever to work through a mainstream publisher. And then we had to ask ourselves, well, how are we going to get this book out there? Because we can't really expect, Ukrainians to be buying this book. We can't expect schools necessarily to want to buy this book or to realize that it will be useful initially. So we went down the kind of funding route, and luckily, from yourselves, from the Arts Office, and anyway, going from different kind of sectors in the university, we got different bits of funding, which we PPLI as well, and Think Languages, put all of this funding together and then work together on creating the book. So this is basically the book there, if anyone would like to see it. It's called I Want to Speak Ukrainian. And it's available now in a trilingual edition. So we have it in Irish. We also have it in Ukrainian, because I was lucky enough to, I suppose the thing about collaborating between an academic and an undergraduate and then the community is that we were all able to bring our expertise to it. So I could make my contacts in Ukraine. I was able to make contact with a young adult author who was Ukrainian in New Zealand, who did the translation for free. Also with somebody who was able to do the Irish translation for free in Tuareg. So I was able to bring that research expertise, that networking element. And then my undergraduate student was just so full of beautiful ideas and imagination and energy and enthusiasm. And she was great when we went into the schools as well. We went in together and we talked to the children, and they really identified more probably with her because of her age as well. And they saw themselves as potentially being writers themselves. And so it was just such a lovely project to work on. We actually saw it in action with Ukrainian children who were in the class, because we wanted it to be a book that would have Ukrainian words in it, so that the Ukrainian children in the class could feel a part of the experience of reading the book, so that they could say the Ukrainian words when the teacher would get to them. And then they would feel included in that reading process. We also wanted the Cyrillic alphabet to be visual in the text itself. So rather than sort of translating Ukrainian into the Roman alphabet, which is often done in bilingual books between Ukrainian and English or Irish, we wanted it to be visually different so that the students would understand the challenges that the Ukrainian children had in learning English. And they would also gain a sort of cultural awareness, a metalinguistic awareness, a curiosity for languages. Because of course, people could say, well, why would children in Irish schools want to learn Ukrainian? But that's really not the point. The point is that they would become aware of different languages out there, and they would then become, more open to culturally diverse classrooms. And we saw that in action, so it was great. And the feedback has been brilliant from the primary schools. They went out via the Galway Education Centre, and they have gone out as well to all sorts of areas, to adults learning English as well in different centres, Ukrainian centres. And yeah, it's been, and the great thing about it then was that I was then able to feed that back into my picture books course this year and tell the students about this project and about what we had done, which again was inspiring for them. So I suppose there's different ways of going about the community-based learning. You don't have to sort of sit down and say, okay, this is my course. I think for us, it just developed naturally in a way that is actually, I think, quite healthy sometimes to do as well, to just sort of see what expertise you have, how you might, contribute. And then it sort of adds on, it gets bigger and bigger. At the beginning, we thought we might be doing something insane because we didn't know anything about Ukrainian culture or Ukrainian language. And there's me on Duolingo trying to learn a little bit, And I thought, what gives us the right to even make this book? Like, we know nothing about Ukrainian culture. We don't want a stereotypical book. But then we sat down and we said, but that's the whole point. The whole point is that these children in Irish schools don't know anything about Ukrainian culture. The parents don't know anything about, the Ukrainian children don't know anything about Irish culture. So let's just write a book about that curiosity, let's have a child in a school who meets a Ukrainian girl in a school and has to try and find out. And because we did that, we kept it authentic and we were able to stand over it and say, this is not trying to be anything else. It is just simply about finding out about someone who comes into your school who is, from another culture. So yeah, so that's the project really. There's loads more I could say about it, but yeah, I'll leave it at that, I think, because I know you have lots of other things to do this hour.
Oh,
This
Lindsay,
is what I
amazing.
got out of that, Lindsay. That was amazing. The idea of responding to a local need and going to the community and seeing what the need comes out of the community. Love the idea of connecting to funding and funders. I think that's really an important one. To think about, you know, how positive it is for you as an educator that, you know, you do actually get something out of it as an educator, which is really great. The idea
Oh,
that you can
huge. I mean, I
inspire-
learned so much from
yeah,
it.
like it's a learning
Yeah.
experience for everybody involved. Love that.
Mm.
The idea of,
So if anybody,
yeah,
if anybody
sorry.
wants to buy a copy of the book, they are available for sale in Charlie Burns, and the money goes to the Ukrainian, Ireland for Ukraine charity. We didn't want to make any money out of the venture at all, but we do have some that we printed up to sell. So yeah, they're in Charlie Burns, and they post them out anywhere in the world. So you can,
Wow.
you know, you're
You
supporting our
can,
local
you can
bookshop
pop
as
that in
well.
the chat too, Lindsay, if you want to pop the link in the chat.
Yeah.
That's always a good resource. The other thing is about how you leverage your networks. I think it's great that, you know, you went to your networks and you said within the community and beyond and said, who can actually help with this project that actually is responding to a local need. So I think you kind of gave, and the fact that it came from organic, you know, responding to something that came from the community, I think is brilliant. So thank you for sharing.
No,
I
thank
think we
you.
have a
Yeah, that
third.
energy of an
Yeah. Oh,
undergraduate
yeah.
partnership and letting undergrads feel and actually have the space to voice and be part of that partnership as well. Really powerful stuff.
Mm.
It's not easy to let that go and to, you know, see where it goes. And so
No, it was a bit of a journey, all right.
absolutely. Thank you
done.
so much.
Oh,
Lindsay.
and
Such a
I
great
can add one more
example.
thing. I heard about this project, Lindsay, first of all, when I heard you on the radio or heard somebody about this project
Oh,
on the
yeah.
radio. So, you know, be careful that you might have this amazing idea doing a community-based learning or service learning project, and then you could end up going like national. So just
You're
Oh,
in
no,
demand.
we'd love to be
it can
national.
happen.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And our final contributor for this is Kirsten Anderson. Kirsten, you have tons of experience as well. And I feel like, where do we start with your experience? Do you want to have a
Yes.
go for it?
Yeah, so I jotted down some really quick notes. So let's see. So I've had a lot of experience working with migrants, refugees in past posts, so in professional settings that were more medical, clinical, when I was a postdoc, particularly trying to reach these communities. But I've also worked in policy settings, so it's a very different viewpoint when trying to craft policy around migrants and refugees. And then here at the University of Galway, I work in outreach. So I work for Cell Explorers, which is a science engagement and public outreach. And so my particular job is to tailor programs to communities that might normally be left out or disadvantaged for some reason. That includes migrants and refugees, in addition to training the undergraduate or postgrad students that are delivering these programs. So I've had a lot of kind of on the ground experience doing the actual working with these, and now kind of transition to training students in this. So I kind of jotted down some notes of maybe what I've seen that goes into a successful program and successful training of students to go out into the community and run these, or maybe where I've seen things go wrong, where they didn't intentionally mean to cause more harm, but there are just some various things I've seen along the line. So first of all, just acknowledge there are very complex issues involving working with this between policy and these programs and everything. But I think the bottom line, and even what I train students with now, is when you're going into these communities, it's just to acknowledge that many have just kind of faced one of the most, horrible, unimaginable things that we can't put ourselves into. And even from a biological perspective, these stress changes your biology in your brain. So even if I work mostly with children, so even if the child seems fine, there are changes that have occurred. And they just might be scared, might be missing somebody, or even basic needs might be having trouble being met, like they're hungry. So I would say if the student is not engaging or things, there's probably things behind the scenes that are happening that maybe if we can meet a need first, like having food or something, great, because if I'm hungry, I'm also not focusing on something. So kind of the acknowledgement that there are these background factors that are coming into it, but overall a lot will be in a very vulnerable state. And so I think it's important that programs are working to try and build trust with these communities, not walking in like I know everything, or I'm walking in as a scientist, not being like I'm here to teach you about all this science, instead of saying like I'm here to hang out and do something with you, a very different viewpoint. So I often develop programs and start them where the individuals have a choice. So I allow them to lead or make a choice. Often they've been on paths where they've just been pushed down something. And so all of a sudden giving them the option to choose something or to take a lead, it starts to build trust, because you're saying like, I trust you to make a choice on a certain activity or how we want to go about running this experiment. So I think that can be an important aspect to it. And then also in the design of the program, of course, is having this kind of very low barrier to entry, where you don't have to have any foreknowledge or even any interest in the topic, because as I said, there's a lot of things going on in the background. So, you know, running an experiment in our case might not be on the top list of things that these students want to do when they're thinking about something else. But if you develop something where initially it's just something fun and exciting, where it's just sparks an interest or a joy. And this is something when I train students, I feel like it's very common where when you're a student or even a scientist, you're very used to being like, I have to learn knowledge and I have to walk away and take a test. And so you get in front of a class of kids and you're like, well, I hope they learn X, Y, Z. And it's really great if they learn something. But the goal, you know, they get involved in science more. But I always say, step out of that mind. And the goal is just to provide a fun, authentic experience, and more one that will empower those young people where they can kind of build confidence. And I think once you start down that path, that's kind of helping to lift them up within there. Some other things when I'm training students to go out into communities and do kind of community-based learning is also just, and it's very difficult to train, but having an awareness on stereotypes that group might face, or even discriminatory language where we might not think we're saying something discriminatory, but to that group it might be. So there's always some instance of just this awareness that there's, I just said, there's cultures are different to some things that come across. And a lot of times nobody means harm by it, but you're just not aware. So just like an awareness of, think about kind of what you're saying in there. And kind of the biggest thing where I've seen harm happen where somebody didn't mean to is they walk into a group trying to inspire or provide this fun, and by bringing up, like, talking about maybe their path into education or into science and talking about troubles that they had in there, you know, to say like, you can overcome things and you can do it, which is really great. But at the same time, a lot of the struggles that somebody might have had, for instance, I have seen somebody go up like, oh, I had a really hard time, you know, taking these exams and getting into there, but I overcame it and I did it. And that's good to inspire. But sometimes in migrant refugee populations, that's 1,000 years away, because right now they can't get food on the table. And so it's this kind of awareness that there are different situations. And so sometimes trying to describe them a certain pathway towards a certain education or field without knowing what they're going through can cause some harm. So in this case, it's more about, instead of kind of having them go down the same pathway, as I went back to just showing that spark and having that fun aspect of it, rather than trying to share, you know, a particular pathway, which I've seen happen. And kind of the last barrier that comes up, and we just heard all about language, but I have done a lot of training, and they are out there on how to communicate when you don't have the same language. And there's a lot of fun, and these are really cool collaborations between like actors and scientists, or some groups like Kinderborough that have done it, where how do you describe an experiment without talking? And you go through how to, you know, show with your, you know, here's water, and we're gonna put it through something, but going through those, and they're really, really fun resources that are out there that I can share, where you can find ways where people don't speak the same language, you can still successfully run an outreach program. And so kind of, yeah, the sum of what I've kind of learned through it is this idea of just developing something that provides a small bit of ownership and empowerment, and mainly working with kids is just something that allows them to be a kid and to feel like they're having fun. And yeah, my biggest part of training that I tell people is, you know, to be flexible. And back to the first thing as I tell people is, you're as much of a learner in the situation as a teacher, so you can learn a lot from them as well. And it's just this like continual collaboration with the community.
Thank you, Kirsten. And do stick into the chat that link for the,
Yeah.
I'm loving this idea of performance and language.
Yes.
Brandon, I think you and I would be very good at that. We're very expressive people, so we need to learn more about
I love
these.
how all three of our guests spoke about joy.
Yeah.
Love it. And I didn't realize this. All three of you actually worked with youth and possibly in school contexts as well. So for next week and the following, we'll provide some different examples. Especially in our last week, we're working with a community radio station with adults. So it's just, I think, different to look at the different age cohorts and groups. Thank you so much to our three contributors, which I think bring to life a little bit of maybe this denser material. What do you think, Maria, where we're talking a little bit about, I suppose, the service learning and really how to do it, and you kind of really have brought it all to life. This is the background to our short series here. We're funded by Erasmus Plus, and we'll send on all this material. But overall, our focus within the course is to look at service learning. And I suppose, Maria, do you want to share a little bit about some of the
Sure. I
wider
mean, I
context?
guess, it's important that there is a little bit of context and, to understand that, as we have approached to thinking much more about, student-centered and competence-based learning, and looking at the ECTS system and, through both Bologna and through the European Diploma Supplement, that with the emergence of these types of opportunities that the higher education system has offered us in Europe, this is allowing for this service learning to really develop and flourish. So that idea of being able to, focus on competences and the transversal competencies. So that's, part of that. You can go to the next one here. This is not to scare you. It's just to kind of give you, I love charts. And I think this is a really nice way to kind of reconceptualize how we think about, shifting from that teaching to a learning-based model. So when we're thinking about, how we're even developing a service learning module, is to keep in mind that this is about, how we can focus on the learning, this idea of, what's the role, especially like, the role of the teacher. We've all heard that idea of, instead of the sage on the stage, you have the guide on the side. So it's that idea of, how can the teacher be much more about the facilitator, and this idea of exchange of knowledge. And I think we can even take that to a further level to say that's not only with our own students, but how we can make this a learning, bi-directional learning process for the communities from which we're working with. And then it just talks a little bit about, this gives a little bit of the philosophy, the idea of what service learning is. So it talks about it as programming. So we talked a little bit about, different kinds of service learning and community-based projects today and how it can help to solve or meet needs. But there's also service learning as a philosophy. So this understanding, how we can achieve more social justice, and also as a pedagogy. So this idea of understanding education based on the student experience and action and reflections. This idea that service learning becomes a vehicle to these experiences of reflection. So, and I think, in all of the examples, we heard that happening. And even the way that Anne at the beginning was talking about how she had that module to show students how they can reflect better, is a way that, we can look at underpinning service learning as a pedagogy. Keep going there. So there's just a little quote there on, if you're looking for a really good quote, or you're trying to make a case on why you might go about, doing service learning, there's a quote there. And I think it's just important to underpin that service learning is not volunteering, that it's quite a different, a different construct. So I think this definition really shows us that. It's not about volunteer contribution. For charitable purposes, it's about benefiting from such an experience through reflection, academic critique, and providing ultimately recognition through academic credit. That's a big kind of underpinning from this, but also at the same time to build capacity with community organizations or community initiatives. You can keep going. We're really doing the whistle stop tour here. And I like these kind of characteristics. I like the idea of, what does service learning entail? And, the CKI has really kind of encapsulated that around the active participation in the community, that there's this partnership with the community is really important, that you're taking and applying academic theory into the real world context. The idea of exploring issues around social, civic, cultural, economic, and political activities and societal issues that might arise. And that can be in any subject area. So that's the opportunity to look at that. the experiential learning opportunity, and of course the underpinning around reflection are really important in service learning. Phew. And now I wanted to kind of highlight this particular cross technique that was introduced, this idea of what service and learning is. So you have like the different quadrants, and I love quadrant based work anyway. So if you can imagine, if you're thinking about service, but not so much about learning, that's what volunteer work is. So that's why it's in the top left quadrant. And the bottom left quadrant is where you have, you know, once in a while sporadic volunteering, activity where you might help out in, an hour or two here and there. That's not really about learning, and it's just light touch service. And then if you go across to the bottom right, where there is more about the learning, but not so much about service, is the idea of practicums. So, that's often happened, those types of experience that happens in education. That's not service learning either. The service learning is in the top right quadrant, which is much more around both the service and the balance with the learning. So that's why we have, so it's about kind of keeping that in the mind, that it's actually, a bit of both. So I had we have very little time, but I had a quick, quiz.
Oh yeah. And then I
right?
was going to say, when we refer to learning here, we're talking about formal learning, right? So accredited.
Yes, formal learning. And that's why the accreditation is so important, isn't it? Really, like that's an important component. So here's one. So quick quiz. Is it service learning? So I'll read these out, and then you can decide to answer to yourself or answer in the chat. We all need a little wake up. So the scenario A: a group of students, as part of the university, as part of their excursion, organized together with the teacher a collection of garbage from a water source on a mountain. They reflect on the degradation of the environment and attitudes that cause it, and write and send a letter of complaint to the mayor. So is this service learning?
Ooh, this is a hard quiz.
I know, this isn't easy. And there was a lot of them. I only selected a few. So here's number 2. A group of young people from an association decide to respond to a request from a local NGO that needs volunteers to help with organization's logistical tasks. They hardly know anything about the entity or its cause, but are drawn to the activity. Is this service learning?
Okay.
And number 3, a group of university students organizes a festival in solidarity with sick children from developing countries. They first meet the cooperators, investigate the problem and its causes, as well as the characteristics of the recipient country. Is this service learning? These are hard. And the reason why they're so hard
is so complex, that international dimension.
Yeah, but I think that's why I think it's important to think, and that's why we're going through like on a whistle stop level, but it's important if you want to go back and reflect on it, is really just think there's a lot of complexities when it comes to, we really want to work with this community. And you have to think that there is a lot of complexity when doing that. It's not as easy or as cut and dry. So, yeah.
And I suppose we're not value judging a particular partnership or whatever your community engagement work is. I suppose the purposes of the Erasmus Plus project is really just to explore the scholarship that underpins the pedagogy of service learning. So it's, if you're interested as an academic, I suppose, maybe publishing in this area on your module and the work that you've engaged in, you will quickly see how, as Maria points out, different types of work. So that geography trip is quite different from the literature in relation to service learning and community engaged.
Great. And I think that's a really good segue into a
Yeah,
way you can learn more.
absolutely.
That there is actually a digital badge that you can do an online course through the National Forum for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education.
And you
So
can give us some of the reactions if you've done it already. If you've already been involved in that course, let us know.
Yeah, it'd be amazing. And so this just tells you a little bit about, how you could go about. So this this short course is just like a taster, whereas this will give you a lot more of, the resources, how to apply to curriculum design, how you prepare learners to engage in these kind of community engaged learning activities, and how you can design the assessment, side of things. So
and then I popped this in. Yeah, this is campusengage.ie. So again, another great resource. the national network are colleagues across Ireland who have been developing this type of pedagogy. And on the website, they have a number of short videos. So they're really great to have a look at as well. So to check them out. Now.
Great. And so I also really liked when you're thinking about this kind of idea of this community engaged learning or service learning and migrant communities. There is this the 4 R's. And it's just to think about that, when, looking at developing these kind of projects with migrant or refugee communities, this idea of respect. It says students there, this is part of the Buchan's theory, but I think you could also put, students and staff must respect the situation of those in the service. Reciprocity. All agents must engage in mutually beneficial relationship. That's very important, obviously underpinning, the whole ethos of doing this kind of work. The idea of the relevance, this idea of how to make sure that it's connected to the relevance of the academic learning about the subject that they're studying, really important. And also the relevance, I think that you could also add there, the relevance to the community group. That's why it's important to have them as partners. So there's also that, level of relevance. And then the idea of the continual process of reflection. Students are going through a new process themselves of actually working with these communities. So how are they reflecting on it? How can they make this a really genuine learning experience, both about the subject area, the academic area of study, but also on those wider issues about engaging with these communities? I think that's really important.
And what a lovely, nice thing to think that maybe students, as part of their assessment, might reflect on these 4 R's. And I suppose reflection is a core component of community-based learning, because the idea is that the academic credit is awarded not for the time spent in community with partners, it's awarded for the reflection process or the learning process that's emanated out of that time with community. So we're actually going to move rapidly on from this, but we are conscious that so many of you have great experiences, you've had challenges, you've done this type of work. So we are building in time to hear from you again next week and week 4. Your voice matters to us. We're excited.
Yeah, and also you can share in the chat too. So you want to talk about some
absolutely.
challenges or things that come up. Yeah.
Great. So our final piece that we just have, we're going to do about 5 minutes on, is we touched on last week, if you have your students working with new communities, people seeking refuge, migrants, that they might ask or they might ponder, or it might come up in conversation as to why people have this movement. And I suppose we touched on last week material poverty as a source of migration. So if we look at Africa, has 15% of the world's population, rich in natural resources, and yet most of the profits of these resources end up outside of the continent. So when places experience material poverty, it does lead to migration. So lovely piece of research that was done in 2015 here by Global Justice, about 30 billion in overseas aid from the global north to the global south, in particular to Africa. But yet what is extracted out of the African continent amounts to 192 billion in total. And that's from tax, from multinational company profits, so tax avoidance, things like illegitimate debt, and also things like loans, programs that were, again, illegitimate. So if people are familiar with developmenteducation.ie or global citizenship education resources, there are some great tools that you have, things like political cartoons and other types of resources that you can use in your classroom and environment to explore this with your students. So 550-500 is an example of an activity you can do. So 5 refers to 5 billion in terms of voluntary aid from the global north to the global south. 50 refers to 50 billion in overseas aid from government to government. So Irish aid, government is considered the highest aid giver in the world. Of course, that has to be interrogated. Where does that aid actually go to? And then 500 billion refers to what's extracted out of the global south towards the global north. So when I talk to students about every dollar that's raised for the global south as being extracted $5 out, it kind of blows their minds. because they hear a lot about 5 and 50 and they don't hear about the 500 extraction piece, which is articulated very well by Financial Justice Ireland. Again, a great resource you can use with your students. A very short video, it's 2 minutes and 50 seconds, where they go through what is the problem with the system. So looking at institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, whose key decision makers are those who actually are based on economic performance, but of course, it's within structures that extract from the Global South. So although Global South partners have less of a voice in the World Bank and IMF, so they see structural readjustment happening in their countries and so on, and have less of a say in relation to it, it's because of the rules of the structure that are set up that have really impinged upon them. So really want to highlight Audrey Bryan's work in this area. So Audrey Bryan is at DCU. She did this lovely research where she analysed textbooks in Ireland, post-primary books, and said, well, how do our young people in Ireland come to understand the world and others, the others, right? This othering. How do we understand people from different parts of the world? And she said, our books really, unfortunately, paint people from other parts of the world as experiencing underdevelopment because of internal issues, not external, and having little perspective on the global economic process. So this also echoes the research that was done by SUIS in 2011, where they found that college students said there's 3 reasons why people experience material poverty all over the world. They experience material poverty because of war and conflict, and they experience material poverty because of a lack of education and training and corruption. So those 3 things are, again, internal to a place, right? Versus actually understanding the external pressures around tax, trade, and debt, which are the 3 really key pieces that are explored by Financial Justice Ireland. And there are 2 further webinars that you might like to reach out to develop your skills in this area. Changing the World for Beginners, I love that cover there, that's on later on in May, and Professor John Barry from QUB and Tatiana Roa are doing a piece on colonialism. So really, to finish up, I have 1 minute to say that we did this beautiful activity a number of years ago with Galway One World Centre on how to be an effective ally in higher education. And we looked at a scenario where a member of your undergraduate team might, for example, want to be an ally, and they might see something and they might speak up against it in your school or in your unit. And really, we explore then what is effective and ineffective in relation to being an ally for another person. So we'll look at this again. I think we'll do this scenario next week, and we'll explore effective and ineffective allyship. We've included some resources. There's just a shout out there to the Festival of Decolonial Learning that's happening in the UK, and a great resource in this accessible book, very easy to read and digest, Decolonizing the University. So next week, we're going to explore how migration and climate change are linked, and then also get to chat to some of our community partners. Galway Communities Against Racism and the University of Sanctuary is going to join us as well. Phew, we made it. It's 2 o'clock.
Great work.
And thank you all so much for your attention, and to our guest contributors. We really appreciate you bringing voice to your experiences, and thank you all so much.
Yeah.
So halfway through, Maria.
Yeah, well done. And we look forward to seeing you next week, and we'll have more chance to
engage
some interactions.
Interactions, that chat,
yeah, right.
And more practical tools. I'll send the recording and all the material. Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Thanks. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thanks a million. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, Lindsay. Andrew, apply for the money.
Anybody apply. You don't have to just yeah.
Absolutely everybody. I know, I'm picking out Andrew.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, I had to laugh when I saw Rita. I was like, what?
I know, it's me, Lorraine. I'm sitting at Rena's desk.
I'm gonna go here, guys. I'm a bit stressed, to be honest, but
Okay,
think
I
that
know you
went
got a
well.
lot going on there, Lorraine. Well done. And we'll be in touch. Next week I'll be in Kuwait when I'm doing this.
Oh
What?
my God, you're amazing. Was there
Yeah.
anything in the chat that was particularly?
No, this week there wasn't. They were just people reinforcing that they think that the course is really good. Like the
This is helpful.
oh, well, where can I find but applying for the funding? So I guess maybe next week we can maybe, if I don't know if there's links or how you're going to do that or what the process
I
might
know
be.
we're so relaxed here, really, with all of that.
Yeah, that was the only thing I didn't know how to answer. But
I have
lots
to
of
figure-
yeah.
I have to figure out how to save this chat again.
If you can't, don't worry about it, Lorraine. There's not really much, you know, the really the important one there was if people wanted to buy the book, the charliebyrne.ie, but I have that that link.
Oh yeah, I better